Hi everyone, welcome back. In this section of the lectures, we are going to build a simple student management web application. Well, this student management system web application allows users to add a new student, list out all the students, update the existing student, delete the student, and view the student details. So this is a simple student management system web application that we are going to build, and this web application allows the users to add a student, update the student, delete the student, list out all the students, and view the student details. Now let us take a look into what are the features that we are going to develop in this student management system project. First, we will develop list of students feature. In this feature, the user can able to list all the students and user can view all the students from the database. Next, we will implement add new student feature. Well, user can use this feature to add a new student. Next, we will add a validation to the create student form as well. So user can use the validation and accordingly user can create the student. Next, we will implement edit or update student feature. Well, user can use this feature to edit the existing student. Next, we will implement delete student feature. Well, user can use this delete student feature to delete the specific student by using delete button. Next, we will implement view student feature. Well, user can use this view student feature to view the particular student details. So these are the features that we are going to implement in this section of the lectures. Hi everyone, welcome back. In this lecture, we will create and set up Spring Boot project in IntelliJ IDEA. Well, we're going to use Spring Initializer to quickly create and bootstrap Spring Boot project, and then we'll import that project in IntelliJ IDEA. Well, let's head out to the browser. In a new tab, just type start.spring.io, hit enter. This will open the Spring Initializer. Well, Spring Initializer is a web tool that we can use to quickly create Spring-based applications. Next, let us go ahead and fill up the project information over here. So here, go to the project section. Here you can see different types of projects: Gradle Groovy, Gradle Kotlin, Maven. Since we are going to use Maven, so let us keep Maven is selected over here. And here we have different JVM languages like Java, Kotlin, Groovy. Let us keep Java selected as it is. Next, here, let us select the Spring Boot version. Well, as we are going to use Spring Boot 4, let us select 4.0.0 RC1. Don't select snapshot. Next, go ahead and fill up the project metadata over here. So here, let us give group as net.javaguides. Next, let us give artifact as student management system. Well, project name is same as artifact, so let us keep project name as student management system, and then description demo project for student management system. Next, package name net.javaguides.sms. SMS stands for student management system. Next, keep packaging jar, and then configuration, keep properties as selected. If you want to use YML, you can select YML. And here we are going to use latest version of Java, that is Java 25. So as of now, Java 25 is the latest long-term support release. So we are going to use Java 25 over here. Next, go to the add dependencies, click on it, and here let us type Spring Web. Well, in order to develop the Spring Boot web applications or RESTful web services, we are going to use Spring Web dependency. And this dependency internally provides Apache Tomcat server as a default embedded container to quickly run our Spring Boot application. Okay, so let us select Spring Web dependency over here. Next, let us go ahead and use Spring Data JPA dependency. Well, Spring Data JPA dependency we use to reduce a lot of boilerplate code that is required to develop the DAO layer or a repository layer. And the Spring Data JPA by default internal uses Hibernate for the database communication. So let us select Spring Data JPA dependency. Next, we are going to use MySQL database. For that, we are going to use MySQL JDBC driver to connect our Spring Boot application with a MySQL database. Next, we are going to add a validation to the Thymeleaf, HTML pages. For that, we are going to use validation dependency. Next, we are going to use Thymeleaf to develop the web pages. So let us go ahead and select Thymeleaf dependency over here. So Thymeleaf is a modern server-side Java template engine for both web and standalone environments. It allows HTML to be correctly displayed in browsers and as a static prototypes. So let us go ahead and select Thymeleaf dependency over here. Perfect. So as of now, let us keep this dependency as it is. Next, if you want to explore this project, you can go ahead and click on explore over here. And here go to pom.xml file, and here you can see the Spring Boot version. You can see the Java version over here. And then here you can see the dependencies like Spring Data, Starter JPA, Spring Boot Starter Thymeleaf, Spring Boot Starter Validation, Spring Boot Starter Web MVC, and then MySQL JDBC driver. Okay. Next, if you expand this SRC folder, you can see the standard Maven project structure. Alright. Next, go ahead and click on this close button over here. Next, click on the generate button to generate this Spring Boot project as a zip file. So click on generate, and you can see the project is downloaded as zip file. Next, let us open this zip file in the folder, and then right click and then extract. Now we have extracted student management system project. So let us open the IntelliJ IDEA and let us import the project. So here click on the open button and then go to the folder where your Spring Boot application is present. In my case, it is in a downloads folder. And here go ahead and select the student management system folder. Click on select folder. So IntelliJ IDEA will take a couple of seconds to download all the Maven dependencies and store in the local Maven repository. So in our Spring Boot application, we are going to use the Lombok library to reduce the boilerplate code, such as getter setter methods, constructors, toString, equals method, etc. So instead of creating all these things manually, we can use Lombok library to reduce the lot of boilerplate code. So here let us go ahead and add the Lombok dependency and let us configure the Lombok in our IntelliJ IDEA. So let us go to the browser. In a new tab, just type Lombok Maven dependency and hit enter. Go ahead and click on this first link and select the latest version. And then just click on this dependency. It will copy to the clipboard, and then go to the project, go to the pom.xml file, and here go to the dependency section, and at the end just paste this dependency. Next, this Spring Boot Maven plugin internally provides a older version of Lombok. So let us exclude the Lombok dependency from this Maven plugin. So here let us add the configuration tag, and then let us add the exclude tag over here, and then add the exclude, and then go to the Lombok dependency and just copy these attributes like group ID, artifact ID, and version, and here paste it. Okay, that's it. Next, go ahead and click on the sync Maven changes icon to sync all the Maven changes. Okay, perfect. Now we have successfully added Lombok dependency to our pom.xml file. In order to use Lombok in an IntelliJ IDEA, we need to do a couple of settings. So go to the file and go to the settings, and here just search for annotation, and here go to the compiler section, go to the annotation processors. So we are going to use the Lombok annotations, and IntelliJ IDEA should recognize the Lombok annotations. For that, we are going to enable the annotation processing over here, and then click on apply, and then click on OK. Next, we will also install the Lombok plugin in IntelliJ IDEA. So go to the file again, go to the settings, and here just search for plugins, and then here just search for Lombok. So here I have already installed the Lombok plugin. If the Lombok plugin is not installed in your IDE, then make sure to install it. Just click on the install button, it will install. Alright, great. I will see you in the next lecture. Hi everyone, welcome back. In this lecture, we'll configure MySQL database in our Spring Boot project. Well, let's head over to the IntelliJ IDEA. And in previous lecture, we have generated Spring Boot project using Spring Initializer, and we have imported in a IntelliJ IDEA. In this lecture, we'll configure MySQL database in our Spring Boot project. Well, if you go to pom.xml file, we have added Spring Boot Starter Data JPA dependency. Well, this Spring Boot Starter Data JPA dependency internally configure a data source. We don't have to manually write a configuration to create a data source. Alright, so Spring Boot will automatically configure a data source whenever it will find Spring Boot Starter Data JPA dependency in a pom.xml file. Well, Spring Boot Starter Data JPA dependency, it wrapper application.properties file to get MySQL database configuration details. Hence, we need to configure all the MySQL database configurations in the application.properties file. Alright, so before configuring MySQL database details in our Spring Boot project, let's first create a database. So head over to the MySQL workbench, and here let's create a database. So just type the statement create database followed by database name. So let's give database name as SMS. SMS stands for Student Management System. And go ahead and execute this SQL statement and just refresh the schema. And there we go. SMS database is created. And let's set this database as a default schema. Okay, now we have created a SMS database in our MySQL workbench. Next, let's go to IntelliJ IDEA and go to application.properties file, and here we will configure MySQL database details so that our Spring Boot application will connect to the MySQL database. So just type the property spring.datasource.url. So let's configure JDBC URL to connect to the MySQL database. So JDBC :MySQL and then localhost. Well, our MySQL database is located in our local machine, hence we need to provide a localhost. But if your MySQL database is located in other remote machines, then you need to configure that remote machine IP address or host name over here, and then followed by the port, that is 3306 is the default port for MySQL server, and then followed by the database name, that is SMS. Okay, next let's configure MySQL username and password. So just type the property spring.datasource.username equal to root. Well, in my case, my MySQL database username is root, but make sure that whatever the database user that you have to provide that username over here. Next, let's configure spring.datasource.password. Well, in my case, my database password is MySQL@123, but make sure that whatever the database password that you provide, you have to give over here. Alright, now we have configured MySQL database username and password. Next, let's configure couple of Hibernate properties. Let's type the properties spring.jpa.properties.hibernate.dilate. Alright, so this is the property that we use to configure Hibernate dilate for MySQL database. And here is the value org.hibernate.dilate and then just type MySQL. And if you can see here, MySQL 8, dilate 5, 7. So all these dilates are deprecated. So let's choose MySQL dilate. Okay, class. Alright, now we have configured MySQL Hibernate dilate. Well, we need to configure this MySQL dilate because Hibernate will refer this MySQL dilate and it will create appropriate SQL statements with respect to the database vendor. Alright, next let's configure one more Hibernate property, that is spring.jpa.hibernate.dtl-auto equal to update. Well, this property is pretty useful because this property will automatically create the database table in a database, and if tables are already present in database, then it will simply alter the table. It don't drop the table and create the new tables. Okay, now we have configured MySQL database in our Spring Boot project. Next, let's run our Spring Boot application and let's see whether our Spring Boot application will connect to the MySQL database or not. So let me go to main endpoint class over here, and from here I want to run the Spring Boot application. And here you will get an option like Lombok requires enable annotation processing. So go ahead and click on enable. Alright, and if you look at the console over here, Spring Boot application is up and running in an embedded Tomcat server on port 8080. And if you can observe here, there are no exceptions or errors. It means that our Spring Boot application is successfully connected to the MySQL database. Well, look at here few important log statements in a console. We have configured MySQL dilate in application.properties file, this one, and Hibernate is using MySQL dilate. Okay, next you can see Hikari data source. Well, Spring Boot by default uses Hikari data source to connect our Spring Boot application with the MySQL database, and Spring Boot by default uses Hikari connection pool to make a connection to the database. Alright, so just remember these few things. In order to connect our Spring Boot application with the MySQL database, we need to configure all these details like JDBC URL, username and password, and we need to provide database dilate to the Hibernate so that Hibernate will create appropriate SQL statements with respect to database vendor, and Spring Boot will automatically configure a data source for us. We don't have to manually create the data source, and by default Spring Boot will use Hikari data source, and by default Spring Boot will use Hikari connection pool. Alright, so these are the few important things you need to remember whenever you connect your Spring Boot application with the MySQL database. Alright, so in this lecture we have successfully made a connection between Spring Boot application and MySQL database. Alright, great. I will see you in the next lecture. Hi everyone, welcome back. In this lecture we'll create a student JPA entity. Well, let's go to IntelliJ, and in previous lecture we have configured MySQL database in our Spring Boot application, and we have also seen that our Spring Boot application is successfully connected with the MySQL database. Alright, now let's go ahead and let's create a student JPA entity. Before that, let's quickly create a packaging structure for our Spring Boot project. So go to the main package, right click, new, and then choose package, and let's give package name as controller. Well, we'll keep all the Spring MVC controllers within a controller package. Let's create one more package, right click, new, and then choose package, and let's give package name as service. Well, all the service related interfaces and classes will keep within a service package. Similarly, let's create one more package and let's call it as entity. Well, we'll keep all the JPA entities within this entity package. Next, let's create one more package and let's call it as DTO. Well, DTO stands for data transfer object, and we keep all the model classes within a DTO package. Next, let's create one more package, right click, new, and then choose package, and let's give package name as repository. Well, we'll keep all the Spring Data JPA repositories within a repository package. Next, let's create one more package and let's call it as mapper. Within a mapper package, we'll keep all the mapper related classes. Alright, now we have created a standard packaging structure for our Spring Boot project. Next, let's go ahead and let's create a student JPA entity. We'll go to entity package, right click on it, new, and then choose Java class, and let's give a class name as student. Alright, next let's define the instance variables for this student class. Let's have private long id, and then private string first name. Alright, and then private string last name, and then private string email. Perfect. So to keep it simple, let's have these fields in a student class. Next, let's use a lombok annotation to reduce the boilerplate code. So let's use add getter lombok annotation to generate getters for these instance variables. Next, let's use add setter lombok annotation to generate setter methods for these fields. Let's also use no argument constructor as well as all argument constructor. Alright, now we have created a student Pojo class. Next, let's go ahead and let's make this student class as a JPA entity by using JPA annotations. So let's use add entity annotation from jakarta.persistence package to make this class as a JPA entity. Next, let's use add table annotation from jakarta.persistence package to configure the table details. For example, let's use name attribute of this annotation to give a name to the table. For example, let's give table name as a students. Alright, next let's configure the primary key for this entity. In order to do that, let's use add id annotation from jakarta.persistence package. Next, we need to configure primary key generation strategy. For that, let's use add generated value annotation from jakarta.persistence package, and we need to pass a primary key generation strategy. For that, let's use strategy attribute, and then let's use primary key generation strategy as a identity. Well, look at here, we have 4 types of primary key generation strategy, and we're going to use identity as a primary key generation strategy. Let's choose identity as a primary key generation strategy. Next, we can use add column annotation to configure mapping between database table column and entity field. For example, here we can use add column annotation from jakarta.persistence package to define the column name. For example, let's say name equal to first underscore name. Okay, but by default JPA will give a column name to this field with this name. Okay, we can simply ignore this add column annotation over here. Well, if you don't provide at column annotation, then JPA will by default provide a column name as a field name. And here you can see here email. Well, let's make this email column as a not null and also make this email column as a unique. So here we can use add column annotation to configure column details. For example, let's use add column annotation from jakarta.persist package and let's use its attribute, that is null label equal to false. In order to make a column as a not null, we can use null label equal to false. Next, we need to make this email column as a unique. For that, let's use unique equal to 2. Okay, now we have configured this email column as a not null as well as unique. Okay, great. Now we have created student JPA entity. Next, let's run our Spring Boot application and let's see how Hibernate will create this students table automatically in a database. Now let me stop the Spring Boot application and let me run the Spring Boot application again. And there we go. Our Spring Boot application is up and running. Alright, now let's go to MySQL Workbench and here go to our SMS database, and before that let me refresh the schemas, and under tables you can see students table is successfully created, and just right click select rows and you can verify the columns ID, email, first name, last name. Alright, and if you look at the column name here, first underscore name, last underscore name. Alright, we haven't configured a column name in a field by using add column annotation. Alright, by default JPA will give column name as like this. It means that the student JPA entity that we have created in this lecture is working as expected. Alright, great. In next lecture, we will create a Spring Data JPA repository for this student JPA entity. Alright, great. I will see you in the next lecture. Hi everyone, welcome back. In this lecture, we'll create a Spring Data JPA repository for student JPA entity. Well, let's head over to the IntelliJ IDEA, and in previous lecture we have created student JPA entity and we have seen that Hibernate automatically created a students table for the student JPA entity in a database. In this lecture, we'll create a Spring Data JPA repository for this student JPA entity. We'll go to repository package, right click on it, new, and then choose Java class and select interface, and let's give interface name as student repository. Well, this is the typical naming convention developers follow to create a repository. Student is the JPA entity name followed by a repository. Alright, let's hit enter, and next let's extend this student repository from JPA repository. So just type extends and then JPA repository. Well, notice here JPA repository is from org.springframework.data.jpa.repository package, and JPA repository is a generic interface, and we need to pass two parameters. First parameter is the type of the entity, second parameter is the type of the ID. Alright, let's choose JPA repository interface and then pass first parameter as a entity name. So in our case, student is the entity name and second parameter is the type of the ID. For example, if you go to student JPA entity, here we have given long data type as a type for this ID, right? So this long data type we are passing as a second parameter to JPA repository interface. Alright, once we define student repository, it extends JPA repository, then this student repository will get a CRUD methods to perform CRUD database operations for this student JPA entity. Alright, we don't have to write an implementation class to implement this student repository interface. Spring Data JPA by default provides implementation class that implements this JPA repository interface and its methods. Well, if you dive inside JPA repository interface internally extends CRUD repository interface as well as paging and sorting repository interface. It means that JPA repository will leverage all the methods from these two interfaces. Okay, so JPA repository will get all the CRUD methods from this CRUD repository interface and all the paging and sorting related methods from paging and sorting repository interface. Alright, we just have to extend this one interface. It will internally provide all the methods from CRUD repository as well as paging and sorting repository interfaces. Okay, now let's take a look into the implementation class of this JPA repository interface. Well, go ahead and click on here and just scroll down, and here you can see simple JPA repository. Well, simple JPA repository is a default implementation class of JPA repository interface. Well, if you look at here, simple JPA repository implements JPA repository implementation interface, and if you go inside JPA repository implementation interface, it extends a JPA repository interface. Okay, so this is basically inheritance, right? It means that simple JPA repository class, it internally implements JPA repository interface, and it will implement all its methods. Okay, for example, delete by D, delete all by D, get by D, exist by D, find all by D. Alright, so it means that simple JPA repository class, it implements all the methods of JPA repository interface. Next, notice here, simple JPA repository class, it internally annotated with at repository annotation. Hence, we don't have to again use at repository annotation in our student repository interface. For example, some of the developers annotate repository interface with at repository annotation, but actually we don't have to use this repository annotation over here, because if you can notice here, simple JPA repository class, it is already annotated with at repository annotation, right? Hence, we don't have to again annotate our repository interface with at repository annotation. Okay, well, if you can observe one more important point in a simple JPA repository, simple JPA repository class, it internally annotated with at transactional annotation. It means that all the methods in a simple JPA repository class are by default transactional. Okay, if you check the methods, for example, delete method is annotated with at transactional annotation, delete by ID method. Okay, and if you can notice, save and flush method, save all. Okay, so all the public methods in a simple JPA repository class are by default transactional. Alright, again we don't have to use at transactional annotation in a service layer to make these methods transactional. Now we have discussed three important points. First point is JPA repository interface has an implementation class named simple JPA repository. Well, if you just go inside JPA repository, you can get its implementation class, that is simple JPA repository. Okay, so simple JPA repository is a default implementation class of JPA repository interface. Okay, just remember this class name. Next important point is simple JPA repository class, it already annotated with at repository annotation. Hence, we don't have to annotate our repository interface with at repository annotation. And third important point is simple JPA repository by default provides transaction for its methods. Okay, if you can notice here, all the public methods in a simple JPA repository class are annotated with at transactional annotation. Alright, hence by default all the methods in a JPA repository interface are by default transactional. Okay, we don't have to use again at transactional annotation in a service layer to make repository methods transactional. Okay, if you have a requirement to make your methods explicitly transactional, then only you can use at transactional annotation. Alright, so these are three important points you have to keep in mind whenever you use Spring Data JPA in our Spring Boot project. Alright, so in this lecture, we have created student repository interface. It extends JPA repository interface from the Spring Data JPA library, and we have provided student and long as a parameters to JPA repository interface. Now, this student repository will get a CRUD methods to perform CRUD database operations for this student JPA entity. Alright, great. I will see you in the next lecture. Hi everyone, welcome back. In this lecture, we'll create a student DTO class as well as student mapper class. Well, let's understand why do we need a student DTO class. Well, if you look at our Spring Boot web MVC architecture over here, we have a controller and view, but we need to also have a model, right? So in typical Spring MVC architecture, we should have a model, view and controller. Alright, and if you look at our architecture, we have controller, view. We also need to create a model, right? For that, we'll create a student DTO class, and this student DTO class acts as a model. Alright, so typically we create a student DTO class to transfer data between controller layer and view layer. Alright, so let's go and let's create a student DTO class as a model class to transfer the data between controller layer and view layer. Well, we'll also create a student mapper class to convert student DTO object to student JPA entity object and student JPA entity object to student DTO object. Alright, so let's go to IntelliJ IDEA and let's go to DTO package, right click on it, new, and then choose Java class, and let's give class name as student DTO, and let's define instance variables for this class. So let's say private, and then long ID, and then private string first name, alright, and then private string last name, and then private string email. Alright, perfect. Now we have defined the instance variables for this student DTO class. Next, let's use Lombok connotations to reduce the boilerplate code. Let's use @getter Lombok connotation to generate a getter methods for these instance variables. Next, let's use @setter Lombok connotation to generate a setter methods for these instance variables. Next, let's use @noArgument constructor as well as @allArguments constructor. Okay, great. Now we have created student DTO class. Well, you might be wondering, we have already a student JPA entity class. It contains the same fields, and why again we are creating student DTO class with same fields? Well, if you look at our Spring Boot Web MVC architecture, we need to have a student DTO class as a model class to transfer the data between controller layer and web layer, and we use student JPA entity to store the data in a database. Okay, in real-time project we keep a JPA entities with respect to database and DTO class with respect to transferring the data between controller layer and web layer. Alright, so let's keep student JPA entity with respect to the database and student DTO class as a model class to transfer the data between controller layer and web layer. Alright, so let's go back to our IntelliJ idea, and next let's create a student mapper class to map student DTO class to student JPA entity and vice versa. So go to mapper package, right click on it, new, and then choose Java class, and let's view a class name as student mapper. Well, we basically use a mapper classes to keep a common logic. Well, in our Spring Boot project, we frequently convert student DTO to student JPA entity and student JPA entity to student DTO, right? So in student mapper class, we'll keep a mapping common logic, so that whenever there is a requirement to convert student DTO to student JPA entity and vice versa, then we can simply use this student mapper class. Alright, so within a student mapper class, let's create a static method, and let's give a return type as student DTO, and let's give method name as map to student DTO, and let's pass student JPA entity as a parameter. Alright, perfect. Now let's have an instance of student DTO, and let's use constructor to pass the values to student DTO object. So here let's have student.getID, and then student.getFirstName, student.getLastName, and then student.getEmail. Okay, and then put the semicolon and then return student DTO object. Perfect. We have created a student DTO object, and we have passed a ID, first name, last name, email from the student JPA entity. Okay, next let's create a one more static method, public static, and then let's have return type as a student JPA entity, and let's give method name as map to student, and then pass student DTO object as a parameter. Perfect. So in this case, we need to create a student JPA entity object, and we need to return. So let's have a student JPA object, and then new student, and let's pass values in a constructor. So student DTO.getID, student DTO.getFirstName, student DTO.getLastName, and then student DTO.getEmail. Perfect. Next, let's return student JPA entity object. Well, let me recap what we have done in this lecture. We have created student DTO class as a model class to transfer the data between controller layer and view layer. Next, we have created student mapper class to map student JPA entity to student DTO and vice versa. Alright, great. I will see you in the next lecture. Hi everyone, welcome back. In this lecture, we'll implement a backend for list students feature. Well, if you look at our screenshot, we're going to basically develop a list students feature, something like this. We'll create a web page, and then we'll display a list of students in a table. Alright, in this lecture, we'll create a backend for this list students feature, and in next lecture, we'll create a web page using Thymeleaf template, and then we'll display a list of students in a table like this. Okay, and if you can notice here, the URL localhost colon 8080/students. Well, whenever user hit this link in the browser, then we have to create a handler method to handle this request, and then we need to return the view, right? So in this lecture, we'll create a handler method to handle this request, and in next lecture, we'll create a Thymeleaf template HTML view which displays a list of students in a table like this. Alright, so let's head over to the IntelliJ IDEA and let's create a handler method. We'll go to controller. Let's first create a controller and let's call it as student controller. Alright, perfect. Let's annotate this student controller with add controller annotation from org.springframework.stereotype. Well, once we annotate this class with add controller annotation, then this controller becomes a Spring MVC controller and it is capable to handle HTTP request. Within this student controller, we are going to write a handler method to handle list students request. Alright. Well, before creating a handler method in a student controller, let's first create a service layer. Well, if you look at our Spring Boot Web MVC architecture over here, a controller layer depends on service layer. Hence, let's first create a service layer and then we'll come back to developing controller layer. So let's go to IntelliJ IDEA and let's create a service layer for student. So go to service package over here, right click, new, and then choose Java class, select interface. Let's give interface name as student service. Within a student service interface, let's create a method and let's give method return type as list of type student DTO, and let's give method name as get all students. Perfect. Now we have created a get all students method in a student service interface. Let's create a class. It implements student service interface. So go to service package, right click on it, new, and then choose package, and let's give package name as IMPL. IMPL stands for implementation. Alright, so go to IMPL package, right click, new, and then choose Java class, and let's give class name as student service IMPL. Alright, next we need to implement student service interface. So here let's type implements and then call student service interface, and then go ahead and mouse over on this student service IMPL class. You will get option to implement the methods. So go ahead and click on this implement methods and just choose the methods that you want to implement, and then go ahead and click on OK. Next, let's annotate this student service IMPL class with add service annotation from org.springframework.stereotype package. Well, whenever you create a service class in your Spring Boot project, make sure that you annotate this service class with add service annotation. Next, let's inject the dependency, that is student repository. Just create a instance variable of student repository over here, and next let's use a dependency injection to inject the student repository dependency. For that, let's create a constructor for this student repository field. Now we have injected student repository dependency in a student service IMPL class by using dependency injection approach. Well, here we don't have to use @@add annotation. Well, typically we use @@add annotation to inject the dependency, right? But whenever the Spring Bean has only one parameterized constructor, then we can omit adding this @@add annotation, because Spring 4.3 onwards, Spring will automatically inject the dependency whenever it will find a Spring Bean. It has only one parameterized constructor. Hence, we can omit using @@add annotation. Perfect. Next, let's go and let's implement get all students method. Well, here let's get a list of student DTO objects from the student repository. So here let me declare students object and then call student repository. It has a find all method, and look at here, find all method returns a list of students, right? And this student is a JPA entity. Well, notice here get all students method returns a list of DTOs, but we have a list of student JPA entities, right? So now let's convert list of student JPA entities to list of student DTOs. Next, let's have a list of type student DTO, and then let's call it as student DTOs, and then let's call students. So this is the list, so we can call its stream method, and then stream has a map, so let's call map method. And if you look at here, map method takes function as a functional interface, and we can use a lambda expression to implement this function interface. Alright, so let's call map method over here, and then let's have a lambda expression. So let's pass a parameter, that is student. Well, student is basically a JPA entity object, and then let's have a lambda symbol. And in order to convert student's JPA entity to student DTO, we can use student mapper, right? So let's call a student mapper, and then it has a method that is map to student DTO, and then pass this student JPA object. Perfect. Finally, we need to collect the result. For that, let's call collect method, and then it has a collectors.toList method. So this will basically return a list of student DTO, right? So let's call this method. Okay, perfect. Now we have converted list of student JPA entities to list of student DTOs. Next, we need to simply return student DTOs. Perfect. Now we have implemented get all students method. It returns a list of student DTOs. Now we have implemented service layer for list students feature. Next, we need to develop the controller layer. So go to student controller, and within that we need to write a handler method. So before that, we need to inject the student service dependency. So here let's have a instance variable of student service. Well, notice here we are injecting student service interface as a dependency. We are not injecting class as a dependency. Well, Spring team suggests to inject interface as a dependency to maintain the loose coupling. That's why developers prefer to inject the dependency by using interface. Now we have created an instance variable of student service. Let's create a constructor. Right click generate and constructor, and select the variables, and then click on OK. Now we have created a constructor. It means we are basically injecting this student service dependency in a student controller class using constructor based dependency injection. Now let's go ahead and let's write the handler method. Let's type public and then string as the return type, and let's give method name as list students, and then let's annotate this method with @getMapping annotation, and let's pass the URL, that is /students. Well, here we are using @getMapping annotation to handle HTTP GET request with the URL /students. Alright, perfect. Now let's go and let's pass a model as a parameter to this method. So let's have a model, and make sure that you select model from org.springframework.ui package. Alright, perfect. Now within the model, basically we store a list of student object. For that, let's post retrieve a list of student object from the service layer. So let's have a list of type student DTO, and let's call it as students, and then call student service, and then it has a method that is get all students. Perfect. Now we got a list of students. Next, we need to store this list of students in a model. For that, let's have a model object, and then it has a add attribute method. Well, here we have multiple overloaded add attribute methods. For example, this first add attribute method takes 2 parameters, second add attribute method takes 1 parameter. So we're going to use post one, that is this add attribute method, it takes 2 parameters. Okay, so just select this one and then pass post parameter as a students. So this is basically a key, and then value as a actual students object. And in a Thymeleaf HTML template, we use this key to refer to this students object. Okay, great. Once we store the data in a model, next we need to return the view. For that, let's have a return statement over here. Return and then students. Well, this students is HTML Thymeleaf template view. In next lecture, we'll create a students Thymeleaf template view, and we'll display a model data in a students Thymeleaf template. Alright, great. I will see you in the next lecture. Hi everyone, welcome back. In this lecture, we'll implement Frontend for list students feature. Well, in previous lecture, we have created a handler method to handle list students request. And this handler method retrieves a list of students object from the database and then it will add a list of student objects to the model, and it returns a view. In this lecture, we'll create a student's Thymeleaf template view and we'll display this model data. Alright, at the end of this lecture, we'll be able to see this screen. Okay, so we are going to create a Thymeleaf HTML view and we'll display a list of students in a table, something like this. Alright, so let's go ahead and let's implement Frontend for list students feature. So let's go to IntelliJ IDEA and let's go to templates folder. Well, by default, Spring Boot will find all the Thymeleaf templates under templates folder. Hence, we need to create all the Thymeleaf templates within this templates folder. Alright, so let's right click on this templates folder, new, and then choose HTML file, and let's give a students as a HTML file name. Well, look at here, we are returning the view that is students, right? So this students view is same as this students.html. Okay. Next, let's give a title as a student management system. Alright, and next we need to define a XML namespace for Thymeleaf. Well, in order to use Thymeleaf syntax in this HTML page, we have to provide XML namespace for Thymeleaf. Okay, so let's type XML namespace, that is :th, and then http www.thymeleaf.org. Okay, so in order to use Thymeleaf syntax in this HTML page, we have to mention the XML namespace for this Thymeleaf at the beginning of this HTML page. Next, let's use Bootstrap CSS framework to style our HTML elements. Well, we're going to use Bootstrap 5. It is the latest version. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's get a Bootstrap CSS CDN link, and then we'll add that link in the header. We'll go to browser, and here let's type Bootstrap CSS CDN 5, something like this, and hit enter and click on this Bootstrap version 5. So this is the official documentation link, and just scroll down, and here you can see copy paste the style sheet into header. So this is basically a CDN link to use a Bootstrap CSS library. Okay, so you can also download this Bootstrap CSS from the official website, and you can add to the project, and you can provide the link in the HTML file. But to quickly set up the Bootstrap in our project, we can use CDN links. Okay, now let me copy this Bootstrap CSS CDN link. So you can click on this copy button to copy to clipboard, and let's go to IntelliJ IDEA and go to students.html file, and in header just below title paste it. Okay, let me quickly align this one. Perfect. Now we have added Bootstrap CSS CDN link to this HTML file. Next, we can use Bootstrap CSS classes to style the HTML elements. Okay, great. Next, we need to add a header to our HTML page. Well, if you look at our screenshot, we need to add a header something like this, and we need to add a project name in a header. Alright, and the header should be in a dark color. Okay, let's go to browser, and in a new tab just type Bootstrap CSS navbar 5 and hit enter, and go ahead and click on this post link, and then just scroll down, and here you can see this is the navbar standard template that Bootstrap provides. So we can use this navbar standard template to create a header in our project. So let's copy this navbar and let's go to our project and go to the body. Within the body, just paste it, and let's remove the unnecessary code. So here we have a navbar, so let's replace navbar with the project name, that is student management system, and just scroll down, and here we have a div. Within that we have an unordered list. Okay, within that we have a list. So let's keep this list and let's remove other list elements. Alright, and after that we have form, so let's remove this form as well. Perfect. Now let's save the file and let's stop the server and let's run Spring Boot application again. Okay, let's go to browser, and in a new tab just type localhost :8080/students and hit enter, and there we go. We have added a header to our HTML page, but this header should be a dark, right? We have to add a black color as a background for this header. So let's go to navbar, navbar page again, and just scroll down and let's find the Bootstrap CSS class to make header as a dark. Just scroll down and look at here, this navbar is in a dark color, right? So if you look at its Bootstrap CSS class here, we have navbar dark, background dark. So let's copy these two Bootstrap CSS classes and let's go to our project and go to navbar over here, and here we are using light as a background color. So let's replace these two Bootstrap CSS classes with dark Bootstrap CSS classes. Okay, now let's save the file and stop the server. I restart the Spring Boot application and let's go back to browser and let's go to our application. I refresh and there we go. Now the header looks good, right? Next, let's go and let's design the table, and within a table we'll display list of student objects. After navbar, let's add some break elements to give some space between header and table. So let's add a couple of break HTML elements over here in order to give the spaces. Next, let's have a div, and then let's give a Bootstrap CSS class that is container. Well, Bootstrap basically provides three types of containers. One is container, another is container hyphen include, and third is container hyphen custom. Instead of custom, we can specify the size for the container, for example 200 pixel, 500 pixel, something like that. But let's use a container, a Bootstrap CSS class for this page. Within a container, let's create a row. For that, let's have a div, and then let's use a Bootstrap CSS class that is row. Within a row, let's display the page heading. For that, let's use h1 tag, and then let's give page heading as list of students. Perfect. Next, we need to design the HTML table and we'll display list of students. So before that, let's have one break element to give a space between heading and table, and then let's have a HTML table. Alright, and let's use a standard Bootstrap CSS class to style this table element. So let's say table and then table hyphen stripped. Alright, and then table hyphen h-word, and then let's also have a border for this table. For that, let's use table hyphen bordered. Perfect. So these are the standard Bootstrap CSS class we can use in order to style the table. Within a table, let's have a table header, and then within a table header, let's have a table row, and then within a table row, let's have a table columns. So let's say th, and let's give post column name as student first name, and similarly let's give second column name as student last name, and let's give third column name student email. Okay, next let's give fourth column name as actions. Perfect. Now we have created 4 columns for this table. Next, we need to display a data in the table. So here, after this closing table heading, let's have a table body, and then within a table body, let's have a table row. Well, within a table row, we basically iterate over a list of students and will display each student. So in Thymeleaf, in order to iterate or loop over a list of elements, we can use th colon each attribute. For example, here let's have a th colon each attribute, and then let's define the variable student and then colon, and here we're going to use a variable expression that is dollar within a curly braces. Let's pass students. Okay, so here we are using th colon each attribute to iterate over a list of students, and this students object we are referring from a Spring MVC controller. Well, if you go to student controller, within student controller we have a handler method, right? And we have added students as a key and students object as a value, and we are using this students key to retrieve this students value. Okay, so basically we are using this students variable to retrieve the value in a th colon each attribute. Okay, and this is dollar within a curly braces we are passing this variable, and this dollar curly braces. So this is basically a variable expression. So we use a Thymeleaf variable expression in order to refer to the variable. Next we have a student object. Well, this student object is a local variable and the scope of this variable is up to this tr element. We cannot access this student local variable outside this tr element. Okay, so in Java we use for each loop to iterate over a list of elements, right? So similarly, Thymeleaf provides th:(each attribute to iterate over a list of elements, and in this case we are iterating over a list of students. Alright, it's pretty simple. And within this table row, let's have a table data. Alright, next here we're going to use th:(text attribute to display the text. We need to use a variable expression in order to access the student model object attribute. For example, here student dot first name. Well, if you look at the student DTO class here, so this student DTO class is nothing but a model class. It has first name, last name, email attributes, right? So these attributes we are referring here. Okay, so this student is nothing but a model object. Okay, student DTO model object, and we are using its attribute over here in order to get the value. So this th:(text attribute, so this attribute will evaluate this expression and display the result. For example, let's say post name contains Ramesh, then this th:(text attribute will evaluate this expression and it will display Ramesh as a text. Similarly, let's go ahead and let's populate last name and email values. So let's have a table data, and then let's use th:(text attribute, and let's pass the expression using variable expression, and then student dot last name. Okay, so this th:(text attribute evaluate this expression and print the result. Next, populate student email ID data. So for that, let's have a td and then th:(text attribute, and then let's have a expression using variable expression student dot email. Now we have displayed student email as well. Okay, next we need to have one more table data element for action. Well, as of now, let's keep table data element body as an empty. In upcoming lectures, we'll add actions like edit, delete, view. As of now, let's keep this td element body as a empty. Okay, now let's go ahead and let's run the Spring Boot application and let's see how this table looks in a browser. So let me stop the server and let me start the Spring Boot application again. Alright, our Spring Boot application is up and running. Let's go to browser and let's refresh our Spring Boot application, and there we go. We got a list students page over here, but if you look at the table, there is no data present in this table, right? So we'll insert a couple of students record in a students database table a bit later. Let's first make this table heading in a dark color. So let's go to IntelliJ IDEA and let's go to table header element over here, and let's add a bootstrap CSS class that is table-dark. Okay, now let's stop and start the Spring Boot application, and let's go to browser and let's refresh, and there we go. Now the table heading looks good, right? Now let's head over to the database and let's insert a couple of records in a database table so that a data will be populated in this web page. So let's go to MySQL Workbench and go to our database, that is SMS, and go to students table, and here we need to manually insert the records. So let me quickly insert few records over here. Let's say ID 1 and email, let's say ramesh@gmail.com, and let's give post name as Ramesh, last name as Padtare. Alright, and let's insert one more record with ID 2, and let's give email as john@gmail.com, and let's give post name as John, second name as Sina. Alright, next let's insert one more record with ID 3, and then let's give email as sanjay@gmail.com, and let's give post name as Sanjay and last name as Jadhav. Perfect. Let's go and let's apply these changes. So click on this apply and then apply and then close. Okay, and then select star from sms.students, and there we go. Now we have 3 records in a students table. Next, head over to the browser and let's refresh our application, and there we go. You can able to see 3 students are populated in a list students table. It means that we have successfully implemented list students feature. In next couple of lectures, we will implement create student feature. Alright, great. I will see you in next lecture. Hi everyone, welcome back. In previous couple of lectures, we have implemented list students feature. Now we need to implement create student feature. In this lecture, we will add a new student link in the header, and then we will create a handler method to handle new student request. Well, if you look at the screenshot over here, we are going to add a new student link in the header like this, and whenever user click on this new student link, then we'll create a handler method to handle this new student request. Okay, so let's go to IntelliJ IDEA and let's quickly add a link. So go to students.html file, and here go to navbar, and then here we have home. So let's replace this home with new student. Alright, let's add a link to this anchor tag. Well, just replace this with the Thymeleaf attribute. So in order to define a link for this anchor tag, we can use a Thymeleaf expression, that is th:/href, and then we can use a link expression to define a link for this anchor tag. So here is syntax: @ within a curly braces, just pass the link. Let's have a link as students/new. Okay, now we have added new student link in the header. Once user click on this new student, then we need to create a handler method to handle this new student request, right? So let's create a handler method to handle new student request. Before that, let's run the Spring Boot application and let's see how this new student link looks in a header. So let's go to browser and let's refresh, and there we go. New student link is visible in a header. Now let's go and let's create a handler method to handle this new student request. So let's go to IntelliJ IDEA and let's go to student controller, and here we are going to write the handler method. So let me write the comment handler method to handle new student request. Perfect. So let's type public, and then return type of the method is string, and let's give method name as new student. Alright, and let's go and let's use @get mapping annotation to handle HTTP GET request with the URL /students/new. Well, if you can notice here, this URL we have provided in a link. For example, if you go to students.html file, here we have added this link, right? /students/new. So this link we are handling by using this handler method. Alright, perfect. Now go to our method and let's pass model object as a parameter. Next, we need to create a student model object here to store student form data. So in our case, the model object is student DTO, right? So let's have a student DTO object over here, new and then student. Perfect. Next, let's add this student object to the model. So let's have a model, and then let's call its method, that is add attribute, and then pass student as a key, and then student DTO object as a value. Well, once we store a data in a model, next we need to return a view. For that, let's have a return statement, and then let's pass the view name, that is create student. Well, we haven't created create_student view yet. In next lecture, we'll create a create_student Thymeleaf template HTML view, and then we'll design the HTML form to create a new student, and then we'll store that student form data in this student model object. Alright, great. In next lecture, let's create a create_student Thymeleaf template HTML view. Alright, I will see you in the next lecture. Hi everyone, welcome back. In previous lecture, we have added new student link in the header, and whenever user click on this new student link, then we need to create a handler method to handle new student request, right? So if you go to student controller, we have written a handler method to handle new student requests in the previous lecture. In this lecture, we will create a create_student Thymeleaf HTML view, and then we design create student form. So go to templates folder. Within that, let's create a HTML file and let's give name as create_student. Perfect. And next, go to students.html file and let's copy this header, and let's go back to create_student.html file and let's remove this header and let's paste it. Well, we need this bootstrap, CSS CDN link to style the HTML elements in this page as well. That's why we have added this header. Next, let's go back to students.html file. We need a navbar as well. So let's copy this navbar. Okay, and let's go back to create_student.html file and go to body. Within body, just paste it. Okay, perfect. So if you can notice here, th:/href. Well, this is basically a Thymeleaf attribute, right? And in order to use Thymeleaf syntax in this HTML page, we have to define an XML namespace for Thymeleaf at the beginning of this web page, right? So go to HTML element, and here we need to define an XML namespace for Thymeleaf. So just type XML namespace th and then http www.thymeleaf.org and just save it. And now you can see the Thymeleaf attributes are available. Okay, so in order to use Thymeleaf syntax in this HTML page, we have to add XML namespace at the beginning of this web page. Okay, great. Next, after navbar, we need to design the form. So here, let's add some of the break elements to give a space. So let me add a couple of break elements over here. Next, let's create a div, and then let's use bootstrap CSS class, that is container. Alright, perfect. Well, if you look at the screenshot over here, we'll design the HTML form something like this. And first we create a border by using CRUD, and then we'll keep this form within this CRUD. Okay, so let's go to div, that is container. Within that, let's create one more div, and let's give bootstrap CSS class as a CRUD. Okay, and then let's create a CRUD header. For that, let's create a div, and then let's give bootstrap CSS class, that is CRUD-header. Within a CRUD header, let's use h2 header element, and then just pass create student as a heading. Next, we need to create a CRUD body. For that, let's have a div, and then let's give a bootstrap CSS class, that is CRUD-body. Within a CRUD body, let's create a form, and let's pass the attribute for this form. Let's have a method, that is http post method, and then next, let's use a role for this form, that is form, and then next use th:/action Thymeleaf attribute to define a action link for this form. So here let's use link expression to define a link for this action, that is @ within a curly braces. Just pass the URL, that is students. Perfect. Next, let's use th:/object Thymeleaf attribute to point to the model object that comes from the Spring MVC controller. Well, if you go to student controller, within that we have written this handler method in previous lecture, right? And we have added the student DTO object as a model to this model object using add attribute method. And if you look at here, first parameter is a student and second parameter is actual student DTO model object. And we need to refer this student DTO model object by using this variable, right? Hence, we need to pass this variable to the th:/object attribute. Okay, in order to refer, we can use variable expression and then pass student as a variable name. So th:/object attribute, it points to the model object that comes from the Spring MVC controller, in our case student controller. Okay, great. Next, within a form, let's go and let's create a form input page. For that, let's use a div here. Let's have a div, and then let's use bootstrap CSS class, that is form-group, and then bottom margin 3. Within a div, let's create a label, and let's give Bootstrap CSS class that is form hyphen label, and then let's give label name as student first name. Okay, after label we need to define the input field. For example, if you go to screenshot, we have a student first name as a label. Next we have a input text field. So let's go ahead and let's define the input field over here, input, and then close it, and then let's define the attributes for this input field. So let's have a Bootstrap CSS class post that is form hyphen control. So this is the standard Bootstrap CSS class that we can use to style the input element. Next let's use id, and let's give id as a first name, and then name first name. Alright, next let's give placeholder, and let's give placeholder as enter first name. Perfect. Next let's go and let's use the type. So let's use type as a text. This is the text input field, right? Next let's use th::field attribute to point to the model object attribute. Well, here in our case the model object is student object, right? And this student object is basically come from the Spring MVC controller, in our case student controller. So go to student controller, and here this student model object is nothing but student DTO class. And if you go inside student DTO class, we have first name, last name, email attributes. Alright, so we are using these attributes in a create student HTML file. Okay, so in order to access these model class attributes, we're gonna use th::field attribute, and then we simply use the selection expression over here. So here is the syntax: start within a curly braces, just pass the attribute name that is first name. Okay, so you can go to student DTO class, you can simply copy this attribute name first name, and you can simply paste it over here, because this th::field attribute, it is referring to the student DTO class attribute that is first name. Well, whenever user enter the data in this text field and submit the form, then that data will be stored in this first name attribute. Okay, next we need to define the input field for last name as well. So let me quickly copy this div and let me paste it over here, and let me change accordingly. So this is a student last name, and then id should be last name, and then name equal to last name, and then placeholder enter last name, and then here we need to pass a field as a last name. Okay, if you go to student DTO, now we have created input field to hold the last name value. Next we need to create an input field for email as well. So let's go back to create_html file, and let me copy this div and let me paste it over here, and let me change accordingly. So this is the student email ID. Alright, and next let's give id as a email, and then name as a email, and then placeholder enter email address, and next give type as a email, and then here we need to pass field as a email attribute. Now we have created 3 input fields: student first name, student last name, and student email ID. Next we need to create a button to submit the form. So go to this div. After this div, let's have a button over here. Alright, and let's give Bootstrap CSS class for this button hyphen primary. Alright, and let's use a type as a submit, as this is the form, so we need to provide a type as a submit. Next let's give button name as submit. Alright, great. Now we have defined the button for this form. Next let's go ahead and let's run our Spring Boot application, and let's see how this create student form looks in our application. So just stop the server and start the Spring Boot application again. Now let's go to browser and let's refresh our application and go ahead and click on new student, and there we go. Well, notice here create student form, it looks quite wider, so let's make it short and let's place in the middle. Well, let's use Bootstrap grid system provided CSS classes to align this form at a middle, and let's make it a little short. So let's go to IntelliJ IDEA and go to this div. It has a container CSS class, and here let's add a Bootstrap CSS class, that is row, and then let's use column mid size 8, and let's also add a offset mid 2. Okay, now let's save the file and let's stop the server and start the Spring Boot application, and let's head over to the Chrome browser and just refresh, and there we go. Now the form looks good, right? Well, notice here create student card header. So let's align this create student card header at a center by using Bootstrap CSS class. So let's go to IntelliJ IDEA and go to this card header, and here go to H2 and let's use Bootstrap CSS class, that is text hyphen center, and stop the server and start the server again, and let's go to browser and just refresh, and there we go. Now create student header looks good. In this lecture we have designed the student create form. In next lecture we'll create a handler method to handle this create student form submission request, and we'll store this form data into a database. Well, whenever user enter student first name, last name and email and submit the form, then we need to create a handler method to handle this form submission request, and we need to store this form data into a database, right? In next lecture we'll create a handler method to handle this form submission request, and we'll store this form data into a database. Alright, great. I will see you in the next lecture. Hi everyone, welcome back. In previous lecture we have created create underscore student Thymeleaf HTML page, and we have designed the create student form. Well, if you look at our application, we have designed the create student form like this. Now we need to create a handler method to handle this create student form submission request. Well, whenever user enter student first name, last name, email ID and submit the form, we need to handle this form submission request, and we need to store this form data into a MySQL database, right? So let's go and let's create a handler method to handle this create student form submission request. So let's go to IntelliJ IDEA and go to student controller. Let me write the comment over here. Handler method to handle save student form submit request. Alright, so let's type public, and then let's give return type as a string, and then let's give method name as save student. Alright, let's annotate this method with add post mapping annotation to handle HTTP post request, and let's give URL /students. Well, if you go to create underscore student.html file, we have given a link to the form action, that is /students, right? So now we are writing handler method to handle this URL, right? If you go to our handler method, we are passing /students, right? And in the form action also we are using same URL. It means that whenever user enter the form data and submit the form, then this handler method will get called. And one more point is, if you go back to create underscore student.html file, here we are using student model object to store the form data, right? Now we need this student model object in a handler method as well. For that, let's have a student DTO, and this is a student. Alright, and in order to get a form model data, let's use add model attribute annotation and then pass the reference variable, that is student. Well, this student object we are referring from the HTML form from here. Okay, so whenever user enter the data into the form and submit the form, that data will be stored in this student object, right? And this student object we are referring using add model attribute. Next, within a save student method, let's call student service, and then let's call its method create student, and then let's pass student DTO object. Alright, and if you can notice here, this create student method is not created in a student service interface. So if you can just mouse over on this create student, you will get an option to create a create student method in a student service interface. So let's go and let's click on this link. An integer ID will automatically create student method in a student service interface. Now let's go and let's implement this method in a student service IMPL class. We'll go to student service IMPL class and just mouse over on this class, and here you have option to implement the methods. So go ahead and click on this implement methods and just select the method that you want to implement and click on OK. Now we got a create student method. So let's go and let's provide implementation for this create student method. Well, in order to save student data into a database table, we should have a student JPA entity, right? But here you can see we have a student DTO object. So let's convert student DTO object to student JPA entity. Well, here let's rename this variable as a student DTO, and let's have a student JPA entity object over here, and let's use student mapper. It has a map to student method and just pass student DTO object. Now we have converted student DTO to student JPA entity. Next, let's call student repository. It has a save method and just pass student JPA entity object. Perfect. Now we have created a create student method. It will save a student data into a database table. Next, let's head over to the student controller, and you can see here now the create student method is available in student service. Next, we need to return the view. Well, whenever user enter the form data and submit the form, next we need to redirect that user to the list students page, right? So if you look at here, we have written a handler method to handle list students request, right? So let's redirect user to this page. Okay, so here let's write a redirect statement, redirect colon, and then the handler method URL, that is students. Well, notice here the flow. Here we have written redirect statement. Well, whenever user enter the form data and submit the form, then this handler method will get called, and then the form data will be stored in a database. Next, we are redirecting user to the list students page by using this redirect statement. Well, redirect colon / student. So this is the URL, and we have written a handler method to handle this URL over here. Okay, so whenever user enter the form data and submit the form, then this handler method will get called, and this handler method will save that form data into a database, and then it will redirect that user to the list students page by using this handler method. Okay, pretty simple. Now let's go ahead and let's run our Spring Boot application and let's see how this works. So let me stop the server and let me start the Spring Boot application again, and let's go to browser. Let's go to our application and just refresh, and then let's enter the create student form data. So let's enter student first name as Vikram, last name as Jadhav, and email ID as a vikram@gmail.com, and go ahead and click on submit, and there we go. A Vikram student is added to the list of students page. It means that the create student feature is working as expected. So let's add one more student. Let's say Umesh, last name as Fadtare, and then email ID as umesh@gmail.com, and then go ahead and click on submit. Perfect. So look at here, Umesh student is added in the table, and if you go to database and go to students table, select rows, and look at here, there are 2 new entries. It means that create student feature is working as expected. Okay, and if you go to create student form again, and if you click on submit and look at here, a empty entry is added. Okay, it means that we haven't added any validation to this form. That's why a empty data is stored in a database. For example, if you go to MySQL Workbench and just select rows from students database table and look at here, a blank values are inserted in the columns. Well, it is not a good idea to allow users to add a blank or empty value in the form. Okay, so basically we need to add a validation to this form. In next lecture, we'll see how to add a validation to this create student form step by step. Alright, great. I will see you in the next lecture. Hi everyone, welcome back. In previous couple of lectures, we have implemented create student feature. In this lecture, we are going to add a validation to this create student form. Well, if you look at our screenshot, we need to add a validation to this create student form, something like this. We'll add a validation for first name as first name should not be empty, and we will add a validation for student last name as student last name should not be empty, and we will add a validation for student email address as student email should not be empty. Okay, so we're going to basically add a validation to this create student form, something like this. All right, so it's pretty simple. Just follow the steps that I'm going to implement in this lecture. Let's head over to the IntelliJ IDEA and let's add validation to create student form step by step. So first step is we need to add the validation dependency. We'll go to pom.xml, and here we have already added Spring Boot Starter validation dependency. Well, Spring Boot Starter validation dependency provides all the required validation libraries to implement the validation in a Spring Boot application. Well, if you dive into Spring Boot Starter validation dependency, it internally provides all the libraries. For example, it internally provides Hibernate validator dependency, and Hibernate validator dependency basically implements, Jakarta validation API dependency. Well, Jakarta validation API, it is a standard API provided by Java EE, and Hibernate validator is an implementation of Jakarta validation API. And Spring Boot Starter validation dependency, it internally provides all these validation libraries to implement a validation in Spring Boot application. Okay, first step is you need to add this dependency in a pom.xml. In our case, we have already added Spring Boot Starter validation dependency while creating our Spring Boot application. All right, second step is we need to add a validation annotations to model class. Well, in our case, student DTO is a model class, and we are using this student DTO class, model class, in our Thymeleaf HTML templates, isn't it? Hence, we need to add validation annotations to this student DTO model class. So open student DTO model class over here, and here let's add a validation annotations. Well, let's use @ not empty annotation from Jakarta validation constraints package. Okay, and we can also customize the validation message by using this message attribute of this not empty annotation. Let's pass the validation error message, something like student first name should not be empty. All right, similarly, let's add validation annotation to last name as well. So let's use @not empty annotation, and then let's use its message attribute to provide custom validation error message. Let's say student last name should not be empty. Perfect. Now let's add a validation annotation to email as well. So let's use @not empty annotation and just use message attribute, and let's say student email should not be empty. All right, and let's use one more annotation, that is @email annotation, to validate the email. Perfect. Now we have added validation annotations to student DTO model class. So this is the second step. Well, third step is we need to enable validation for this student DTO model class in a handler method. So go to student controller, and within a student controller we have written a handler method to handle save student form submit request. And here we need to add a @valid annotation from Jakarta.validation package to enable validation for this student DTO model class. Well, we have added validation annotations to student DTO class attributes, right? And we need to enable validation for these annotations by using @valid annotation. All right, so this is the third step. Fourth step is we need to use binding result class from Spring Framework library to check form validation errors and return to the UI. So let's pass binding result class as a parameter over here. So just say binding result and make sure that you choose binding result from org.springframework.validation package. All right, and let's also pass a model class object. All right, perfect. Here let's add a if condition to validate the errors by using binding result class object. So just call result.hasErrors. Let's say if there are any errors while validating the form, then we need to simply add a model data to the model object. So in our case, the model data is student DTO object. So let's call add attribute, and then key is a student and value is a student DTO class object. Perfect. Next, simply return to the same view, that is create underscore student. What we have done, we have added a if condition over here, and we have used has errors method of binding result to check the any errors while submitting the form. And let's say if there are any error, then we simply add this student DTO object to the model and we return the same view, that is create underscore student. It has a form. Okay, so this is basically a fourth step. Fifth step is we need to display the error message in a create student form. So go to create student.html file, and here we have an input field. Just below input field, we need to display the error message. For example, if you look at the screenshot, just below input field, we need to display this error message. In order to display this error message, let's use a paragraph element over here. So let's say paragraph element, and then let's use if condition to check whether there are any errors. Then only we need to display the error message, right? So here let's use a dollar within a curly braces. We have a fields object, inbuilt object provided by Spring MVC, and it has a method called has errors. So we are checking the errors for first name. Okay, and then we need to use the bootstrap CSS class, that is text-danger. Well, in order to display the error message in a red color, we can use text-danger class. Next, we need to display the validation error message. So for that, let's use th:_errors Thymeleaf attribute, and then let's use a selection expression over here, and then pass the field name, that is post name. Alright, perfect. Now we have added validation error message to this first name input field. Similarly, let's add this validation error message to last name and email. So let's go to input field of last name, and right after that paste it over here, and let's change the field, in this case last name, and here also pass last name. Perfect. So let's copy this and go to email field. Right after this input field, just paste it over here and just change from last name to email, and here also pass email. Perfect. Now we have displayed error message for each form input field. Okay, so this is the fifth step. Alright, so these are the 5 steps that we have implemented to add the validation to this create student form. Now let's go ahead and let's run the Spring Boot application, and let's see how this validation works. So let me stop the Spring Boot application and let me start the Spring Boot application. Alright, and let's go to browser and let's refresh our application and go ahead and click on submit, and there we go. Our validations are successfully applied to create student form, and you can able to see the validation error message. Student first name should not be empty, last name should not be empty, email should not be empty. Alright, so let's go and let's fill up the data. For example, let's say Meena, first name as Meena, second name is Yadav, and email ID is meena@gmail.com, and go ahead and click on submit, and there we go. Meena student is added to the table. It means that we have successfully implemented validation for this create student form. Well, notice here, if user want to create a new student, then user can use this new student link, and user can navigate to this page and user can create the student. Alright, let's say if user come to this page and user don't want to create a student, then user need to navigate to the list students page, right? So here we haven't provided any link to navigate user to the list students page. So let's go ahead and let's add a students link in the header so that user can go ahead and click on it and user can navigate to the list students page. So let's head over to the IntelliJ IDEA and let's go to create underscore students page, and here go to navbar. We have a new student link in the header. Along with this link, let's also have a students link. So let me copy and paste it over here, and let me simply change this link name and let's view students. Perfect. And here let's change the URL, that is /students. Perfect. Now let's go ahead and let's rerun our Spring Boot application and let's see how this works. So let me stop the server and let me start the Spring Boot application, and let's go to browser and let's refresh our application. And there we go. We got a student's link in the header. Now just click on the student's link and there we go. We're able to navigate to the list students page. Okay, so this completes create student feature end to end. Alright, in next lecture onwards, we'll implement update student feature step by step. Hi everyone, welcome back. In previous couple of lectures, we have completed create student feature. Alright, now we are going to implement update student feature. Well, in this lecture, we are going to implement backend for update student feature. Well, if you look at the screenshot over here, we are going to add a edit button in a actions column correspond to each student so that user can go ahead and click on edit button and user can edit the corresponding student. Alright, so basically we will add a edit button in actions column. Once user click on this edit button, then user will navigate to this edit student page, and from here user can edit the student. Okay, so in this lecture we will add a edit button in actions column and we'll create a handler method to handle this edit student request. In next lecture, we will design edit student form and we will populate the student data in the form so that user can able to edit the student. Okay, let's go ahead and let's add edit button in actions column and let's create handler method to handle edit student request. So let's head over to the IntelliJ IDEA and let's go to students.html file and go to table. Within table we have actions column and go to here table data, and here let's add a edit button. So let's use anchor tag and let's use bootstrap CSS classes to make this anchor tag as a button. So let's say button and then button primary. Perfect. Next, let's add a link to this anchor tag using Thymeleaf attribute, that is th:/href, and then let's use link expression to define the link at the rate within a curly braces /students/student ID. Alright, and then /edit. Perfect. If you can notice here, we have student ID, right? We need to pass a student ID dynamically to this URL. So here is the syntax: open and close braces. Within that, let's have a student ID variable equal to, and you can notice here we have a student object. Okay, so we can get ID from the student object. So here let's have a variable expression and student.id. Perfect. Now this ID will be assigned to this student ID and this student ID will be dynamically replaced in the URL. Okay, perfect. Next, let's go ahead and let's give a name to the link, that is edit. Alright, great. Now let's run our Spring Boot application and let's see how this edit button looks in a actions column. So let me run the Spring Boot application. Alright, and let's go to browser and let's go to students page, and there we go. You can able to see edit button is successfully added in a actions column. Next, whenever user click on this edit button, we need to write a handler method to handle edit student request. For that, let's go and let's create a handler method to handle edit student request. So let's go to IntelliJ IDEA and let's go to student controller and scroll down and go at the bottom, and here let me write the comment handler method to handle edit student request. Perfect. Just type public and the return type is string, and let's give method name as edit student. Alright, and let's go ahead and let's annotate this method with @getMapping annotation to handle HTTP GET request, and let's pass the URL, that is /students/student ID and then /edit. Well, if you go to students.html file, here we have added edit link in the actions column, and if you notice the URL over here /students/student ID edit, the same URL we are using in a handler method, because we are writing a handler method to handle edit student request, isn't it? Next, we need to get the student ID value in this method. For that, we can use add path variable annotation and then just pass student ID. Alright, we need to pass this student ID to this add path variable annotation over here. And then in order to get the value of this student ID, we need to have a ID of type long over here. So let's call it as student ID. Perfect. Next, let's pass a model object to this method. Perfect. Next, within a edit student, we need to get a student object. Let's have student DTO and let's call it as student, and then let's call student service, and then let's call its method get student by ID, and just pass student ID as a parameter. Well, if you look at here, get student by ID method is not created in a student service. So let's go ahead and let's create get student by ID method in a student service interface. So go ahead and click on this method. It will create get student by ID method in a student service interface. Alright, next we need to implement this method in a student service IMPL class. So go to student service IMPL class and just mouse over on this class, and here you can see the link implement methods. So go ahead and click on this link, and here you need to choose the methods that you want to implement, and go ahead and click on OK over here, and there we go. We got a get student by ID method. Next, let's implement this method over here. First of all, we need to get a student JPA entity object from the database using this student ID. So let's have a student JPA entity object over here, and then let's call student repository, and it has a method that is find by ID. And if you can notice here, find by ID method returns optional of type student. Alright, so just call find by ID method and then pass student ID. And then in order to get a student object from the optional class, we need to call get method. Now we have student JPA entity object in place. Next, we need to convert this student JPA entity object to student DTO object. So here what I will do, I will declare student DTO object over here, and then let's use student mapper. It has map to DTO, that is map to student DTO method, and then just pass student JPA entity object. Perfect. Now we have converted student JPA entity object to student DTO object. And finally, let's return this student DTO object. Perfect. Now we have implemented get student by ID method. It returns a student DTO object. Next, let's go back to student controller, and here you can notice here get student by ID method is now available to student service. Next, let's add this student DTO model object to the model. So let's call model, and it has a add attribute method, and then just pass student as a key and student DTO object as a value. Alright, perfect. Now once we add data to the model, next we need to return the view. So just have a return statement over here, and let's view name as edit underscore student. Perfect. Well, this edit underscore student is basically a view name, and we haven't created edit underscore student view yet. In next lecture, we are going to create edit underscore student Thymeleaf template HTML view. Well, let me recap what we have done in this lecture. We have added edit button in the actions column, and next we have created handler method to handle edit student request. Alright, in next lecture, we'll create edit underscore student Thymeleaf HTML view, and we'll design the edit student form, and we'll populate edit student form with a student data so that user can able to edit the student. Alright, great. I will see you in the next lecture. Hi everyone, welcome back. In previous lecture, we have implemented a backend for update student feature. In this lecture, we are going to implement frontend for update student feature. Well, if you look at our code, in previous lecture, we have added edit button in actions column, and we have written handler method to handle edit student request. In this lecture, we'll create a edit underscore student Thymeleaf HTML template, and then we'll design edit student form, and we'll populate the student data in the form so that user can able to edit the student. So let's go to templates folder, and within the templates folder, let's create a HTML file, and let's give name as edit underscore student. Perfect. Well, if you look at the screenshot over here, the edit student page, it looks same as create student page. We'll go to our application and click on this new student, and you can see this create student page. If we can compare edit student page and create student page, both page look similar, isn't it? So the only difference is in edit student page, we need to populate the student data and we need to change the header. Okay, so instead of writing the same code, we can simply copy the code from create student page and we can paste it in a edit student page. So let me go to create underscore student.html file, and from here I will copy the entire code and go to edit underscore student.html file, and I'm going to simply paste it over here, and let me change accordingly. So here we need to change the header. Right now we have create student, so let's change from create student to edit student. And apart from that, we need to change the URL for this form. Well, in case of update student operation, we need to pass a student ID in the URL, right? So go to form action over here, and here just pass student ID in the URL within a curly braces student ID, and we need to pass student ID dynamically to this student ID, right? For that, here is the syntax: open and close braces, and then just get a student ID from this student model class object. So here let's have student ID, and then let's use a variable expression, and then student dot ID. Okay, so here we have a student model object, and we can get ID from this student model object, and here we are assigning that ID to this student ID variable, and this value will be replaced with this student ID. And finally, let's close this action. Alright, perfect. Now let's go and let's run our Spring Boot application, and let's see how this edit student page looks in our application. So let me stop the server and let me start the Spring Boot application again. And there we go, our Spring Boot application is up and running. Let's go to browser and go to our application and just refresh and go to students page and go ahead and click on this edit button, and there we go. You can able to see edit student page looks good, and student data is also populated in a edit student form. Alright, next we need to create a handler method to handle this edit student form request. Okay, so whenever user edit the student data and submit the form, then we need to write a handler method to handle this edit student form submission request, and we need to store this edited student data into database. Alright, so let's go to integer idea and let's go to student controller and go at the bottom, and here let me write the comment handler method to handle edit student form submit request. Alright, perfect. Now let's type public, and then return type of the method is string, and let's give a method name as update student. Alright, and let's go and let's annotate this method with add post mapping annotation to handle HTTP post request. Well, if you go to edit student.html file, we have provided HTTP method as a post to the form, right? That's why we need to handle this HTTP post request by using at the rate post mapping annotation over here. Alright, next let's pass the URL, that is /students/student ID. Alright, so this is the URL that we have provided in a form by using this action. Okay, you can see /student/student ID. So this is the link we are handling by using this handler method. Next, we need to get the value from this student ID by using add path variable annotation over here. So just type add path variable annotation and just pass student ID and then long student ID. Next, we need to get student model object in this handler method. Well, if you go to edit underscore student.html file, here we have student model class object, right? And the edited student form data is stored in this student object. So let's get this student model object in a handler method. So here let's pass student DTO object. Okay, and let's use at model attribute annotation to get the student model object. Alright, perfect. Next, we're gonna also validate the edit student form. For that, let's use binding result class over here, and then next use a model object. Perfect. Now we need to also enable the validation for this student DTO class. For that, let's use @valid annotation. Next, within the update student method, let's have a if condition to check any form related validation errors. Let's have a if condition over here, and then the result dot has errors. Let's say if there are any errors while validating the form, then we can handle that validation here within this if condition. Okay, so let's add the student model object to the model object by using add attribute over here. Student as a first parameter and student DTO object as a second parameter, and then finally we need to return to the same view, that is edit underscore student. Perfect. So if there are any errors while validating the form, then we simply add that student object to the model and we simply return to the same view. Okay, next let's add student or ID to the student DTO. For that, let's use set ID method and then just pass student ID. Okay, next let's call student service and then let's call its method, that is update student, and then just pass student DTO object. Well, notice here this update student method is not created in a student service. So let's go and let's create a update student method. So just mouse over on this update student, and here we will get an option to create a method. So go ahead and click on this link, and IntelliJ IDEA will create an update student method in a student service interface. Next, let's go and let's implement this method in a student service IMPL class. So go to student service IMPL class and just mouse over on this class, and here click on implement methods, and here you will get a update student method. Next, let's implement this method. So here let's simply call student repository and then let's call save method. But this save method expect entity, right? But we have a student DTO object. So let's use student mapper, and then it has map to student method and then pass student DTO. Okay, so basically here we have converted student DTO object to student JPA entity, and then we have passed to save method. Okay, so this will save this student information into the database. Alright, now we have implemented update student method. Now let's go back to student controller, and here you can see update student method is available in a student service interface. Next, we need to redirect to the list students page, right? So here let's have redirect statement, redirect colon and then students. Alright, so once user edit the student information and submit the form, then we need to redirect that user to the list students page. So here we have a handler method to handle list students request, right? So we are basically redirecting this request to this handler method. Okay, and this handler method will basically return a student's view. Alright, perfect. Now let's go and let's run our Spring Boot application and let's see how this update student feature works. Alright, so our Spring Boot application is up and running. Let's go to browser and let's refresh our application. Okay, and go ahead and just edit this Ramesh student. So go ahead and click on this edit button over here, and now I'm going to edit post name, let's say Ramesh123, last name let's say Patari123, and Ramesh123@gmail.com, and click on submit. And here we got a 404 error. It means we have done some mistake in a URL. So let me see what is the mistake in the URL. So if you go to edit_student.html page, the URL is /student/student_id, and if you go to handler method, here we have given the URL student, right? Let's make it as a students. Okay, now let's save the file and let's run the Spring Boot application, and let's see how it works now. Let's go to browser and let's go to our application, refresh over here, and go ahead and click on edit button. So let's edit this Ramesh student. So click on this edit button and let's edit the first name from Ramesh to Ramesh123, Patari to Patari123, and email ID Ramesh123@gmail.com, and go ahead and click on submit. And there we go. Student first name is edited, last name is also edited, and email ID as well. Alright, it means that the update student feature is working as expected. Let's update one more student. So let's update this Sanjay student. So let's click on this edit button and let's say Sanjay to Ram, and let's keep last name as Jadhav, and let's update the email ID ram@gmail.com and click on submit. And here you can see, alright, Sanjay student is successfully edited. And if you want to confirm at a database level, you can go to MySQL Workbench and go to students table, select rows, and you can see Ramesh student is edited and Sanjay student is edited. Alright, it means that the update student feature is working as expected. Alright, great. In next lecture, we'll implement delete student feature. Alright, I will see you in the next lecture. Hi everyone, welcome back. In this lecture, we'll implement delete student feature step by step. Well, if you look at the screenshot over here, we'll basically add a delete button in the actions column, and whenever user click on this delete button, it will delete the corresponding student. Okay, so in this lecture, we'll add a delete button in the actions column, and we'll create a handler method to handle delete student request. Okay, so let's go to IntelliJ IDEA and let's add a delete button in the actions column, and let's also create a handler method to handle this delete student request. So let's go to IntelliJ IDEA and let's go to students.html file, and then let's go to actions column, and here we have already a edit button. So along with the edit button, let's also add a delete button. So let's have a anchor tag over here, and let's use bootstrap CSS class to make this anchor tag as a button. So let's have a button CSS class and then button danger. Well, in order to make button in a red color, let's use button danger CSS class, and then let's add a link to this anchor tag using th:/href Thymeleaf attribute. And then in order to define the link, let's use link expression over here. The syntax is @ within a curly braces. Let's pass the URL, that is students/student ID and then /delete. Well, here we need to pass student ID dynamically into this URL. So here is the syntax: open and close braces and then student ID equal to, let's use variable expression to access model object attribute. Well, here we have a student variable or a student model object. We can get ID from the student model object. So let's pass student over here, and it has attribute ID. Okay, now this student ID is assigned to this student ID, and this student ID value will be replaced in this URL. Okay, so this is basically a placeholder for student ID, and this student ID will be dynamically replaced with this student ID. Okay, now let's give name to the button as a delete. Okay, next let's run the Spring Boot application and let's see how this delete button looks in our application. Alright, our Spring Boot application is up and running. Let's head over to the browser and let's refresh our Spring Boot application, and there we go. Delete button looks good in an actions column. Okay, now user can use this delete button to delete the corresponding student. Alright, now we need to write a handle method to handle this delete student request, and we need to delete the student from the database table. So let's go to IntelliJ IDEA and let's go to student controller, and here let's write the handler method to handle delete student request. So let me write the comment over here: handler method to handle delete student request. Perfect. Just type public and then return type the method is string, and let's give method name as delete student. Alright, and let's annotate this method with @getMapping annotation, and then let's pass the URL /students/student ID and then /delete. Well, if you look at the delete button that just we have created in a students.html file, if you notice the URL over here, we are using /student/student ID /delete, right? So this same URL we are handling in a student controller using handler method. Okay, perfect. Now we have student ID in the URL. So let's get a value of this student ID in a handler method using @path variable annotation, and just pass this student ID to @path variable annotation. So let me copy it and paste it over here, and let's store the value of student ID in a student ID variable. Next, we need to delete a student object from the database by using this student ID. For that, let's call here student service and then delete student and then pass student ID. Alright, and if you can notice here, this delete student method is not created in a student service. Well, if you can mouse over on this delete student method, you can see the option like create method delete student in student service. So go ahead and click on this link to create a delete student method in student service. Alright, so IntelliJ IDEA will basically create this method in a student service interface. Next, we need to implement this method in a student service IMPL class. So go ahead and open student service IMPL class over here and just mouse over on it, and here just click on implement methods and just choose the method that you want to implement and click on OK. Now we got a delete student method here. Let's go and let's implement this delete student method. Within a delete student method, just call student repository and it has a method called delete by ID. Okay, just call delete by ID and then pass student ID. That's it. Now this delete student will delete the student by this ID. Okay, now let's go back to student controller. Now you can see delete student method is available in student service. Next, once user delete the student, next we need to redirect that student to the list students page. For that, let's have a redirect statement over here. Return redirect and then colon and then method handler URL, that is students. Well, if you go to handler method, here we have written a handler method to handle list students request, right? And we simply need to redirect this request to this handler method, and this handler method will return students view. Okay, perfect. Now let's go ahead and let's run the Spring Boot application and let's see how this delete student feature works. So let me stop the server and let me start the Spring Boot application. Alright, and let's go to browser and let's refresh and let me delete the Ramesh123 student. So let me click on this delete button and there we go. Ramesh123 student is deleted, and let me delete the John student and there we go. And let me delete this Meena1 student and there we go. It means that delete student feature is working as expected, and you can also confirm from the database. Well, go to MySQL Workbench and here just go to students table, select rows, and you can notice here there are only 3 students and the rest of the students just we have deleted. Alright, it means that delete student feature is working as expected. Okay, great. I will see you in the next lecture. Hi everyone, welcome back. In previous lecture we have implemented delete student feature. In this lecture we'll implement view student feature. Well, if you look at the screenshot over here, we'll add a view button in the actions column, and whenever user want to view this particular student, then user can go ahead and click on this view button to view this particular student. Okay, so in this lecture we'll add a view button in the actions column and we'll create a handler method to handle view student request. And in next lecture we'll design view student page and we'll display this particular student information. Okay, let's head over to the IntelliJ IDEA and let's add a view button in the actions column and let's create a handler method to handle view student request. So let's go to IntelliJ IDEA and go to students.html file and go to actions column over here, and then we have already edit and delete buttons. So along with these buttons, let's also add a view button. Let's have an anchor tag over here, and then let's use bootstrap CSS class to make this link as a button hyphen info, and let's use Thymeleaf attribute th:/href to define the link for this anchor tag. And in order to define the link, we're gonna use link expression @ within a curly braces. Let's pass the URL, that is students/student ID. Alright, and then /view. Well, we need to pass student ID dynamically to this URL. So let's use the syntax over here, open and close braces, and then student ID. Well, we can get a student ID from this student model object. In order to access student model object, we can use variable expression over here, and then student model object, it has a ID attribute. Okay, now we are assigning the value of this student ID to this student ID, and this student ID value will be replaced here. Okay, now let's add a name to this anchor tag, that is view. Okay, now let's stop the Spring Boot application and let's run the Spring Boot application and let's see how the view button looks in the actions column. So let's go to browser and let's refresh our application, and there we go. View button is visible in the actions column. Okay, now once user click on this view button, then we need to create a handler method to handle this view student request. Alright, so let's go to IntelliJ IDEA and let's go to student controller and just go at the bottom, and here let me write the comment handler method to handle view student request. Perfect. Let's type public and then let's give string as the return type, and let's give a method name as view student. Alright, and let's go ahead and let's annotate this method with @getMapping annotation to handle HTTP GET request, and then let's give URL /students/student ID, and then /view. Now we need to get a student ID value in a handler method. For that, let's use @path variable annotation and just pass this student ID. Alright, and then wrong student ID. Okay, now we got a student ID. Next, we need to get a student object by this student ID. For that, first let's declare a student DTO object. Alright, and let's call student service. It has a get student by ID method and just pass student ID. Okay, so here basically we are calling get student by ID method to get a student by this ID. Now we got a student DTO object. Let's store this student DTO object in a model. For that, let's pass a model object as a method parameter, and then once we got a model object, let's add a student data to the model object. So let's call add attribute method and then pass post parameter as a student and second parameter as student DTO. Once we store student DTO object in a model, next we need to return the view. So here is the return statement, return, and then let's pass the view name, that is view student. Okay, so view student is basically a view name that we are going to create in the next lecture. Alright, so let me recap what we have done in this lecture. We have added view button in a actions column. Next, we have created handler method to handle view student request, and this handler method stores this student DTO object in a model and returns view_student view. In next lecture, we'll create a view_student Thymeleaf HTML view and we'll display this model data. Alright, great. I will see you in the next lecture. Hi everyone, welcome back. In previous lecture, we have added view button in a actions column and we have created a handler method to handle view student request. And this handler method stores student DTO model object in a model and returns view_student view. Okay, in this lecture, we'll create view_student Thymeleaf HTML view and will display the model data. So let me copy this view name and let's go to templates folder and right click on it, new, and then choose HTML file, and let's give HTML file name as view_student. Okay, now let's design this view student page. So first of all, let's define the XML namespace for the Thymeleaf. Well, in order to use Thymeleaf syntax in this HTML page, we have to define XML namespace for Thymeleaf at the beginning of this HTML page. So here just type XML namespace :th and then http and then www.thymeleaf.org. Okay, perfect. Next, we need to add bootstrap CDN link in the header. Well, here let me add the title, that is Student Management System. After title, we need to add a bootstrap CSS CDN link. Well, go to create student.html file. Here we have a bootstrap CSS CDN link. So let me copy it and go to view student page, and right after this title, just paste it. Okay, now we have a Bootstrap CSS CDN link in this HTML page. Next, we need to add a navbar, right? Let's go to create_student.html file, and here we have standard Bootstrap navbar code. So let me copy it and go to view_student.html file, and within the body just paste it. Okay, now we have added header to our view student page. Next, we need to design the card. Within a card, we will display the student information. So here, after navbar, let's have a div. This is a main div, and we'll give Bootstrap CSS class as a container. Within a container div, let's have a row. For that, let's create a div and let's give Bootstrap CSS class as a row. Within a row, let's use Bootstrap grid, CSS classes to align the card at a center. So let's use div over here, and let's have a Bootstrap CSS class that is column mid 8, and let's have an offset. Basically, we need to align the card at a center. For that, we are using offset of size 2. Next, let's create a card. For that, let's have a div, and then let's use Bootstrap CSS class as a card. Okay. Next, within a card, let's define the card header. For that, let's have a div, and let's use Bootstrap CSS class as a card header. Perfect. And let's use h2 header tag over here in order to define the heading. So let's use heading something like student details. All right, and let's align this heading at a center. For that, let's use Bootstrap CSS class text-center. All right, next, once we define the card header, next we need to define the card body. Let's have a div, and let's give Bootstrap CSS class as a card body, and within a card body, let's display student first name, student last name, and student email. Let's use a paragraph element, and then here let's have a student first name text, and then let's use a strong HTML element to display the student name. So within a strong element, let's use th:\text, and then let's use a variable expression to get the student model object attribute. So in this case, first name is a student model object attribute. Well, here we are using variable expression to point to the model object attribute. The attribute name is first name. Well, if you go to student controller, within a student controller we have written a handler method, and within this handler method we have student DTO model object, and this student DTO model object we have stored in a model, and we are accessing this student DTO model object by using this variable in a view student page. Okay, so this is the student variable that is coming from the student controller. Okay, and the student DTO is a model class, and if you go inside a student DTO model class, it has attribute first name, last name, email. So we are basically accessing these attributes, okay, in a view student page. Now we have displayed student first name by using this student.firstname model attribute. Similarly, let's display student last name and email. So let's have a paragraph, and then this is a student last name, and then let's use strong HTML element, and then within that let's use th:\text attribute, and then dollar within a curly braces let's have a student model object, and then its attribute that is last name. Perfect. So now let's also display the student email, student email address. So let's have a strong HTML element, and then let's use th:\text attribute, and then dollar within a curly braces student dot email. Perfect. Now we have displayed student first name, last name, and email. All right, great. Now let's go ahead and let's run our Spring Boot application, and let's see how this view student page looks in our application. So let me stop the server and let me start the Spring Boot application. Alright, our Spring Boot application is up and running in an embedded Tomcat server on port 8080. Next, let's go to browser and just refresh our application. Next, go ahead and click on this view button to view this particular student. So let me click on this view button, and there we go. View student page, displayed successfully. But you can see here the card is slightly attached to the header. So let's add some space between this card and header. So let me go to IntelliJ IDEA and let's go to here. So after the navbar, I'm going to add one break tag. So let me add one more break tag. Okay, now we have given some space. Now let's quickly run our Spring Boot application and let's see how view student page looks. Let me refresh and there we go. Now you can able to see view student page looks good. Okay, and here we have displayed student first name, last name and email as well. Well, this is a simple student management project and it has first name, last name, email. But in real-time project, the student class may have a lot of fields. Okay, now we are only displaying the first name, last name, email. But in real-time project, your student object or student class may have a lot of fields, right? So those fields you can display in this view student page. Okay, so this view student page is pretty useful whenever you want to display a student information. It is not there in this table. In real-time project, you may have a lot of fields in a student class, and in order to show all those student field information, you can use this view student feature. Okay, so this feature is pretty useful whenever you want to display all the student details in this separate page. Okay, now we have completed end-to-end view student feature. Alright, I will see you in the next lecture.